My name is Francis Louis Kiromera. I've been in Canada since 2006, and right now I'm a policy analyst for Cancer Care Ontario, but I've always done a lot of sort of volunteer slash activisty work on the side. I only recently moved back to Toronto though, so.
And in terms of, when you say as a queer man of color, how it can be hard to navigate sexual interaction in sexual spaces. So what does that look like on like a practical person-to-person level?
Well, I don't know. I think I'll answer that with an anecdote. I moved to Canada in 2006 to start my undergrad at U of T. And I moved from, I had just been in Swaziland. I had spent a lot of time living in sub-Saharan Africa. And I thought, like, moving here, coming out, like I was like, this is gonna solve all of my problems. Life will be awesome, unicorn and rainbows. But very quickly, sort of going out, especially like in the scene, sort of like the bar scene, the club scene. Very quickly, I realized that I was othered pretty explicitly by the people that I thought were my people. I thought I would come out and it'd be like all amazing and everyone would like be like super friendly and supportive and like I wouldn't have to deal with racism. I don't think I really thought about racism, especially not having grown up in a black majority setting for a long time. Racism wasn't as front of mind. It was very much sort of like, like in a colonial context and in sort of like that context, yes, but within your peer group, which in my case were often mostly predominantly black, it wasn't cool or like to be white necessarily, or more attractive to be white. And then also sort of like being objectified, like having this sort of like, I don't know how explicitly, like this whole big black cock sort of like situation going on. That was all new to me. Or getting like, once, I think when I started undergrad, the apps weren't as much of a thing, but once the whole apps thing started, like very explicitly racist people, like with so-called quote-unquote preferences, or that fully just like send you messages that are ridiculous, and you're just like, what? So on a personal level, like that's how that has affected me. But then also, I think sometimes working within communities that have dealt with a lot of trauma and sort of navigating how to keep yourself safe while interacting with people that have dealt with trauma that can sometimes have issues brought on by that trauma. And yeah, so it's complicated and it's like multi-layered and it's not easy and yeah, it's messy, but I mean, I don't know, it's my life and I'm happy about it, but
it can be challenging.
It can be challenging.
Right.
And it can be challenging, I think, like, I mean, it's June and it's awesome, it's Pride Month, like this month in particular can be challenging, and the discourse around even sort of Black Lives Matter and their actions or their so-called demands that people feel is not of community when it really is of community, and sort of the language, sometimes coded but sometimes just fully explicitly racist, that you find on online platforms, on Facebook, on in news articles. It's just it affects you, right? And you just, or the feeling that you need to explain yourself all the time, especially because I get tagged on with that group because I hosted Blockorama last year and we were very proud to have them on our stage. And I mean, I don't mind getting tagged on with that group, but like I haven't done half the work they've done for the community, right? So this is kind of weird, but yeah, I don't know. I think that.
I'm glad you brought up Blockorama, because that event was part of this larger conversation about Black Lives Matter and the fact that many of their demands were that these events would continue being funded. Yes. And all of these things. So could you just maybe touch a bit on why these events are important for the community?
I don't think they're important. I think they're essential. Like they're honestly, like, for years, Blockorama has been the one event that if I don't go to anything else at Pride, I make sure to go to that event because it's so affirmative. It's such a space in which it's the only space in which I feel like I can truly be my full self within this community because of all the bullshit that you have to experience in other spaces. And honestly, like I find our community to be particularly racist, and I think there's this idea that as an oppressed people, maybe the idea is not that you can't oppress others as an oppressed people, but like maybe there's just a blind spot that people have. They're like, oh, I had it hard, therefore whatever, without realizing the way in which you reproduce this oppression and this prejudice onto other groups within your community and make them feel like very much outsiders in all of these spaces that are supposed to be all of ours, right? And so I think I've heard like people call these, I don't know, these stages like Blockorama, and I think there's a South Asian stage that has always struggled for funding and has been on and off, like at Pride on and off, like sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not, depending on who the Pride director is, right? But like these are important spaces, especially for like in the case of the Southeast Asian stage. I find it's even more pronounced, sort of like dealing with queerness, being of color, and also a Muslim identity in this current context. In some cases, in many cases, it's just, I don't know. It's essential, and it's affirming, and it's usually a safer space than most of the other spaces in the village. I'd be sad to see them go, and I don't think they will go away. But yeah.
So in terms of, you know, the idea of space, time to talk about Pulse, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So Pulse was one of the few safe spaces for queer men in Orlando and in Florida at large, really, and one of the few safe spaces for queer men of color. So do you think that in the aftermath of the shooting and the tragedy there, in the media narratives and even in conversations just between people on Facebook or Twitter or all these places, do you think that the fact that this was a hate crime against queer people of color was left out and that we only talked about the fact that they were gay?
I think it's an easier conversation to have and it's an easier conversation to get attention around. It's an easier conversation to get to print if it's just like, oh, an attack on gay people, right? I think also like some of the stories that came out, especially immediately after Pulse, when family members were looking for family members, and a lot of the things that came out on social media and also in sort of mainstream media was about how, well, these people weren't out, and like these families are finding out that their relative was at Pulse, and what was he doing at Pulse? What was she doing at Pulse? What were they doing at Pulse? You know, I think that was like a quick sort of moment, a soundbite, but like not something that people reflected on, and sort of how different it is often for communities of color to navigate sort of like being out and being gay, for various reasons, which I mean, like it would take like so long to sort of get into, but I think it's easier to be reductive and to grab that soundbite and be like, oh my god, hate crime by Muslim on gay people. And especially when hate crime by Muslim is very much of the moment and sort of like, it's a story that people want to hear, I think.
What is it that the kind of, you know, quote, mainstream queer community can be doing to advance kind of the rights of queer people of color and stop leaving them behind? It's a big question. But.
Yeah. I think we just need to really like be honest with ourselves. I think honestly, like to be honest, honestly, the best lessons can be found here around the discussion that is happening around Black Lives Matter, about their demands, about police floats, about who is responding the loudest and the angriest about the exclusion of police. If you go on any forum, I can guarantee you it's all white men. Maybe one white woman and two people of color. But it's all, like, all the angry sort of responses and, like, you're making pride exclusionary, blah, blah, blah. I thought this was about inclusion. And anytime there's an attempt by someone of color to engage, and some people have been really patient, like, because I've followed this on threads and on common threads and stuff, it always sort of like goes back to ad hominem attacks, and it's just like, no, you guys are reverse racism, whatever the fuck that is. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be introspection, and like an honest like self-interrogation of like, do these people that are talking about these issues from their perspective have a point? And I would argue we do. And why is it that they feel so strongly about it? And like, maybe before I react, and like before I sort of react angrily and respond and sort of like defend my point of view, maybe I need to listen. Because I think there are not enough voices of color within our spaces that have prominence. And when they are there, they're often under attack. And so they're doing double duty, right? Sort of like, they're doing emotional labor trying to take care of themselves, they're doing labor trying to educate everyone else, and they're doing labor trying to sort of like fend off like all these trolls and all this stuff. Like, I have friends that are part of this group that if you should see their inbox. I got hate mail just from being a host of Blockorama for like 3 weeks after. Didn't respond to most of it, but like, you know what I mean? It's just like, and this is from people that don't know you, right? Mm-hmm. But they feel so strongly that you're wrong because you're asking for some space or some seat at the table, some space, some level of sort of being viewed the same. I hate like the sameness discourse, but like, for the purpose of this, you know, like, that your opinion is as valid as the other person's. And I think people aren't willing to hear it. And I think going back to your context, your story about the States, I think a lot of what we're seeing manifest right now in policy and leadership in their society is also about people not wanting to hear the other side, you know? It might not necessarily be about people of color versus non-people of color. It's just, it could be Democrat, Republican, it could be conservative, liberal, whatever. But it's about being so entrenched in your position and not being able to sort of see the other side. And people would argue that taking space in the way that Black Lives Matter did is sort of shutting out other viewpoints. But I think there's a difference when you've been completely erased and constantly marginalized from space. Taking space becomes about survival. It's not about sort of being deaf to everyone else. You already know the perspective. We've been drilled. The perspective is hammered into you every single day of your life, you know? So, yeah, that's my opinion. And
that fits into with the necessity of these events for queer people of color, right?
Yeah.
Is because you need the space.
You need the space.
Right.
It's not like this is not things that came up organically from community. This is people that were fighting for like having a stage where they saw people like them, where they had the opportunity to see a celebration that looked something like an experience that you have had, you know? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I think people that haven't experienced it or lived it underestimate how resilient we are, which I think is a beautiful thing. I think we all deal with our issues and we all have trouble, but I think queer people of color, and I think queer trans people of color, like the queer trans women of color, men of color that I know, and what they have to deal with is just and how resilient they are, and how they are like, and how they turn it around, and they're still like the biggest cultural producers, and so engaged in discourse, and so still willing to put in that work to bring all of us together forward. I think is something that's just amazing and magical. Yeah.